When the Davis family's youngest son shatters a sacred lantern in their eerie ancestral lodge, he unleashes the frost-bound spirit, a vengeful entity that twists fear into reality. Trapped by a raging storm, the family must confront their darkest regrets and rebuild the lantern before the spirit claims their souls forever. The Davis family trudged through knee-deep snow, their breaths visible in the icy night as the wind howled mercilessly around them. Their destination loomed ahead, the family's ancestral lodge, a massive, sprawling structure that seemed more mausoleum than home. Encased in ice and shadowed by towering pines, the lodge exuded an ominous air that sent shivers down spine, and not from the cold. Willie, the youngest of the Davis clan, dragged his feet behind the others, kicking at the snow with frustration. This wasn't how he wanted to spend Christmas. Inside, the lodge was no warmer than the biting storm outside. The great hall, with its vaulted ceilings and grand stone hearth, seemed hollow and unwelcoming. The family gathered in stiff silence, their strained relationships creating an atmosphere colder than the weather. The fire crackled weakly, failing to melt the tension. "We should never have come here," muttered John, Willie's older brother, tossing his gloves onto a chair. His voice was low, but carried the weight of his disdain. He had fought tooth and nail against the trip, insisting they celebrate at home in the city. But their grandmother, Miss Flakes, the proud and domineering matriarch, had insisted on tradition. The lodge, she said, had been the family's gathering place for generations. "Stop complaining," Miss Flakes snapped, her sharp tone slicing through the room. Her icy glare silenced John, but not without leaving visible resentment on his face. Willie watched the exchange with bitter satisfaction. He wasn't the only one miserable to be here. In the center of the great hall stood a ceremonial ice lantern, a family heirloom that had been passed down for centuries. Intricately carved and glowing faintly from within, it radiated a ghostly blue light that made the shadows on the walls dance. Willie's eyes were drawn to it immediately. He had heard stories about the lantern as a child, tales whispered by his late father about its supposed power to ward off an ancient evil. "What's the big deal with that thing, anyway?" Willie asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "Respect it," Miss Flakes barked, her voice sharp. "That lantern protects this family. It has for generations." Willie rolled his eyes and slouched further into his chair. No one ever respected him, so why should he care about some stupid old relic? As the family argued over dinner, their voices rising like clashing cymbals, Willie's frustration boiled over. He felt invisible, his presence an afterthought in the whirlwind of grudges and blame that seemed to define the Davis family. Later that night, as the family's arguments continued unabated, Willie found himself standing alone in the great hall, staring at the lantern. The faint blue glow seemed to pulse, almost like it had a heartbeat. He hated the way it seemed to command more attention than he ever could. "Stupid thing," he muttered. Fueled by years of neglect and a searing need to be noticed, Willie reached out and tipped the lantern off its pedestal. The sound of shattering ice echoed like a gunshot, silencing the bickering voices in the next room. The shards scattered across the wooden floor, glinting like jagged diamonds. The family rushed into the hall, their faces a mix of shock and anger. "Willie, what have you done?" Miss Flakes shrieked, her voice trembling with fury and fear. Before he could respond, the storm outside seemed to intensify. The wind howled with an almost human wail, rattling the windows violently. The lights flickered, and then the house was plunged into darkness. The oppressive silence that followed was broken only by the wind's mournful cry and the faint, eerie sound of whispers coming from somewhere deep within the lodge. The family lit candles and huddled together in the great hall, their earlier arguments forgotten in the face of an inexplicable unease. Willie sat apart, his guilt weighing heavily on him. He hadn't meant for things to spiral like this. But the whispers grew louder, slithering through the darkness like a living thing. They were faint at first, just on the edge of hearing, but unmistakable. Voices calling his name. Willie's curiosity got the better of him. Grabbing a flashlight, he ventured down the long, narrow hallway that led to the bedrooms. The beam of light quivered as his hands shook. Frost began to form on the walls, crawling in intricate patterns like skeletal fingers. Suddenly, the frost spelled out a single word: betrayer. Willie stumbled backward, his breath hitching. Without warning, a mirror at the end of the hall shattered with a deafening crack. His reflection twisted into a grotesque grin, its eyes hollow and glowing an unnatural blue. He fled back to the great hall, only to find the family staring at someone in the shadows. The frost-bound spirit had come. The entity towered over them, a grotesque amalgamation of ice and mist. Its elongated limbs crackled with frost as they moved, and its face shifted constantly, each visage a mask of terror pulled from the darkest recesses of its victims' minds. Its presence was suffocating, an overwhelming force that sent jagged shards of frost splintering across the floor with every heaving breath, freezing the air until it burned to inhale. It did not attack outright. Instead, it fed on their fear, showing each family member visions of their failures and regrets. Miss Flakes saw herself as a shriveled, forgotten husk, abandoned by her family. John was haunted by visions of the life he could have had if he had left the family behind. And Willie, he saw his father's frozen corpse, accusing him with lifeless eyes. The family quickly realized that the frost-bound spirit wasn't just an avenger of broken bonds. It was a collector for souls. The shattered lantern had been its prison, a relic forged generations ago to trap the vengeful entity. Now free, it sought to claim new souls to add to its collection. Desperate, the family tried to recreate the lantern using fragments of ice found outside. But the spirit's malevolent presence made every step a struggle. As Miss Flakes carved the ice, an unseen force yanked her into the darkness. The family found her moments later, her face frozen in a silent scream, frost creeping over her lifeless body. This loss shook them to their core, but it also galvanized them. For the first time in years, they began working together, driven by sheer survival. While searching the library for answers, Willie found an old journal written by one of his ancestors. It detailed the spirit's origin and the means to defeat it. To trap the frost-bound spirit, someone had to willingly offer themselves as a sacrifice to complete the lantern's power. Willie's guilt over breaking the lantern and unleashing the spirit weighed heavily on him. He made the decision to face the spirit alone, despite his family's protests. As the family finished crafting the lantern, the spirit's attacks grew more ferocious. Ice claws tore through walls, and the temperature dropped so low that their breath froze mid-air. Willie lured the spirit into the great hall, taunting it as it loomed closer. In a heart-stopping climax, the spirit lunged at Willie. At the exact moment, the lantern's light flared brilliantly, engulfing the room in an otherworldly glow. The spirit let out a deafening scream as its form shattered into a storm of icy shards, which embedded themselves into the walls and floor. Willie collapsed, frostbitten but alive. By morning, the storm had cleared. Pale sunlight filtered through the shattered windows, illuminating the battered but intact family. They gathered around Willie, who was weak but alive, and vowed to leave the lodge forever. As they drove away, the repaired lantern sat silently on its pedestal in the empty great hall. Its light flickered faintly, almost imperceptibly. Thank you for braving the cold with us on Twisted Nightmares Chronicles. If this tale sent chills down your spine, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more terrifying tales.